there were a number of things, but fast forward about 10 years later, the launch of Ascension Presents. The original plan there was for a platform for young adults, but we quickly came to see that Father Mike was loved by everyone. So by the time Ascension Presents had come about, it was a good idea. And of course, Father Mike was a great idea. But there really was 15 years of infrastructure underneath it. So I say to anyone who's listening, think big, but realize that you gotta lock in and you gotta put in the time. Have optimism, have zeal, pray for zeal. But I'm sorry, guys, most instances you gotta get ready to lock in because there really are very few free lunches. It's just gonna take time.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Catholic Founders Podcast. I'm your host, Silas Maynor. Catholic Founders is on a mission to help Catholics launch and grow their businesses in a way that helps them become saints because of their businesses, not in spite of them. As Catholic entrepreneurs, we are not created to achieve earthly glory. We are called to be instruments of God's will in the world to bring glory to Him. If this resonates with you, you are in the right place. Okay, folks, today I have the distinct pleasure of sharing my conversation with Matthew Pinto, the founder of Ascension Press, CatholicExchange.com, the Theology of the Body Institute, Envoy Magazine, Luminous Media, and Spark Catholic Communications, among several other things that are not mentioned here. Generally speaking, he is an absolute legend, a serial entrepreneur in the true sense, somebody that I don't think gets enough attention, honestly. Pretty much everybody listening will be familiar with Father Mike Schmitz, who is a key presenter or personality on the Ascension Presents show or media assets, which is their social media component of Ascension Press. And yes, Matthew and his team can be said to have discovered and platformed Father Mike Schmitz, much to all of our benefit. In brief, our conversation today covers some of his perspective on looking back on what he has been able to be a part of building. Obviously he had a role to play in this, but he also credits this to being, something that God put on his heart, that God made possible. So we look back on that. He gives us some advice on how to run our businesses. He gives me specifically advice on how to build Catholic Founders, gives me some of his key tips. And then we talk about his perspectives on what it means to be an investor as a Catholic. So I won't spoil it for you. Just enjoy the discussion. And before we do start, in case you have not already signed up, please be sure to check out CatholicDealFlow.com to sign up for our free Deal Flow newsletter for Catholic investors to invest in Catholic business owners and projects of all sorts. It's completely free. Investors get to remain fully anonymous while still getting that deal flow that we will package up nicely and send your way. And then you can decide whether or not you'd like to reach out. It's time that Catholics started investing in each other, and we are trying to make that happen. So again, go to CatholicDealFlow.com to sign up. And if you are a builder and you'd like to get funded, you can also go to that website and click the link to submit your deck and just a little bit about what you're working on, and we can send that out to the newsletter. Again, no gatekeeping, completely free. All right, guys, let's get into today's episode. All right. Welcome to the show, Matthew. How are you doing today?
Silas, great to be with you.
It is a pleasure to have you. I'm very, very honored to be able to have you. We finally got this on the books, and it's excited to have you here. So you've done a lot of things. I'm here with Matthew Pinto, the founder of Ascension Press, which is probably the thing you're most known for. And if anybody is unfamiliar with Ascension Press, you can just go look up any Father Mike Schmitz video, and you'll you'll find a lot of stuff that he's been involved with. That's all because of Matthew here. So, you've done a lot of things throughout the years. I'm curious, what are the other core accomplishments that you're really proud of, that you're just grateful that the Holy Spirit allowed you to have that opportunity to build those things? Again, we're not asking you to brag, but just kind of tell us a little bit more about how you define yourself and how you introduce yourself.
Sure. I mean, separate from the absolutely true Catholic, love the faith, love my wife, love my kids. They are the primary focus, those things, the faith and the family. From a ministry point of view, things that I'm proud of in the past, when I was a young guy, 25, 26, 27 years old, I began a young adult ministry out in San Diego, California that became very, very big, and many marriages and a ton of beautiful fruit, it seemed, came from that. Within the overt Catholic national ministry world, the Ascension Press work, founding of CatholicExchange.com, Envoy Magazine, co-founding Catholic Exchange, co-founding the Theology of the Body Institute are some of the things that have been great joys. A lot of work. Nothing is achieved really without a lot of hard work, as you probably know and everyone knows. Yeah, and then in the recent years, now getting into this world of helping to fund Catholic founders. So I still feel young. I'm 60 years old, but I still feel like I'm, in a certain sense, I'm just getting started, but it's been a long road, 35 years.
Yeah. I am curious, how did you do so many things? Like, how were you driven to do this? Like, was it because of your faith that you were driven to be involved in those things and you saw a need? Like, I'm always I guess just curious to understand, like, how does one person do many things and just feel led to continue like starting these things?
Yeah, I mean, I became convinced of the Catholic faith. And so it was, and that, oh my goodness, this is true and it will change everyone's life. And despite the challenges, someone once said that Catholicism is something but not easy. I forget what he said, but it just made perfect sense to me. And I had prior to that just natural gifts of organization and marketing and promotion. I don't know what drove these other hungers and desires. I saw the needs that are out there. In fact, Silas, the bigger challenge is what to say no to and how to
Yes, exactly. I mean, I feel
use.
you. I totally feel you. It feels like with Catholic founders, there's always something where people are like, "Oh yeah, you should do this, you should do that." I'm like, guys, like I can't do everything. I got an actual business to pay the bills with, and then we got to do this thing. So, I mean, I just really admire like the fact that you've done so many things. It just, if you, I guess I would be curious, like, if is there anything that you would do differently looking back? Would you have said no to more things to focus on others? Like, would you have started more things? Like, what are the regrets you have, if any?
Yeah, and I have no regrets about any of any of the big items that were rattled off there. I thought they all should have been done. There have been some duds along the way, but I don't even really regret those because at the time they were good ideas or ideas that should have been teased out. And again, I'm not afraid of saying that there are any regrets at all. I got 100, I got 1,000 things individual decisions that were wrong over the years, and I'd be glad to share, many of them. So in that little rabbit hole, I forgot the specific question, but were there regrets? No macro regrets, but there have been hundreds of wrong decisions over the years, and
Yeah.
I've hopefully learned from most of them.
Yeah, and that's just the price of it, right? Like if you're doing a lot of things, we're not perfect. I think this is the I guess you could say in some ways the challenge of our age is like if we're going to try to be good Catholics in the world, it's a very challenging world to be in so many ways, but we cannot become paralyzed by fear of making a mistake or fear of the wrong decision, because then we have no momentum, and God cannot use our momentum if we don't at least kind of like turn the wheels and let him just like let him bend the tracks here or there, like put a tree across the road so we have to turn the other way, like he can steer us, but we have to have at least we have to start powering forward a little bit, right?
No doubt. There are a couple of scripture verses over the years that have hovered over me and I've reflected on many, many times. One is the book of Revelation with the Lord when he says, I'd rather you be hot or cold, just not lukewarm. I'm of the opinion that we're supposed to use prudence. It's the mother of all virtues, I think is what the phrase is. And I love prudence. I love teasing things out. I love consulting with people, which I do often. But I think the Lord would rather us strike out than not swing, is what I'm getting from here. So that's one particular verse. Silas, I've also taken a lot of reflection over the years on the parable of the talents. And, the one who out of fear buried the one talent, and talent is a monetary measure. You and I also know the word as like giftedness or a skill, but talent in this case was a unit of measure. And then the one who then doubled, the two people who doubled their return. So I reflect on those many, many times, hundreds of times over the years, why historically I've pushed hard.
Yeah. Yeah, that's something when I think about St. Paul, I always just imagine him like nowadays being somebody who does push hard. It's not, there's different saints obviously for different people to be attracted to. I'm definitely attracted to the St. Pauls, right? Like they go out and just like really, really be kind of aggressive in some ways, like really push hard because we have to be excited about what we have. So, I'm curious.
If you wouldn't mind, Christopher West has an anecdote that he shares that I've loved over the years. He says, the great saints and the great sinners are made from the same stuff, SCH, however he says that word, that there really is a burning passion. And please, none of this is a boast. It's not meant that at all. I assure you, I have a whole list of things that are getting worked on and need to be worked on, and mistakes that have been made. So this idea that this burning passion, I've wondered over the years, it can't be feigned for 35 years. So it has to be charism. And so one thing I would share with those who are listening or watching is pray for charism. Pray for this charism. In fact, I love the biblical story in the Old Testament where the prophet Elisha, or Elisha, not Elijah, prays for a double portion of Elijah's spirit. There have been many times over the years, most of the time I forget to do it, but there have been many times over the years where I've intentionally prayed for that double spirit. So I encourage anyone who's listening, who loves the Lord, loves the church, wants to do things, pray specifically for a double portion of blessing and zeal and fervor for the faith.
I'm definitely going to add that to my morning routine. I love that. I am curious, as you look, obviously a lot of these accomplishments, what does it feel like, especially with it when it comes to Ascension Press? Like my understanding is that this has impacted the lives of very, very many people, myself included, obviously. But what is it like to be able to look at that and just know that you played a part in it? Like, how do you consider like this was God's will for you to build this, but also kind of you had a part to play in being willing to pick up the mantle, so to speak? Like, how do you separate that out and how do you think about it?
Yeah. So I may err too much in the direction of nature. This idea of grace and nature. Pray as if everything depends on God. Work as if everything that depends on you. So I don't shy away from the fact that for some reason there were natural gifts that God used. And I actually think, Silas, that needs to be celebrated by all apostolates. And here's my quick analogy. Imagine, a family, the Pinto family, your family, where the family did not sing happy birthday, each time a child had a birthday. That would actually be a problem, that one didn't celebrate. So in looking back at the Ascension time, we have as a staff celebrated. I don't think we did it enough. And none of this, again, I think is a boast. I just think it was maybe unhealthy that we didn't do it enough. But the fact is that when I stop to think of it in the occasional question like this, it's very satisfying. It is. Because, Silas, in the same breath, I know the shortcomings. And so I think it's a false humility, whether you're doing incredible things like Focus or the Augustine Institute or Word on Fire or the new, those who are leading Ascension now. It's a false humility if you don't celebrate the fact that, you're being used to do really good things. The fact remains there were tens of millions of people who were reached. We've celebrated. One final statement in this regard. Like when I eventually stepped away from Ascension in 2001 after 23 years, one of the things I wrote in my to-do list, bucket list or whatever, was to actually take time and look back and even journal a bit and celebrate what happened. Because, Silas, in many regards, I and more than a few of my staff could almost let out an exhale and say the words, what just happened? Because we were so busy for those 23 years, now almost 30, that we just didn't take time. But that's one thing I started to do. And believe me, the celebration is not in oneself. It's in what the Lord did through broken instruments. Yes, we had skills, but it was all gift.
Yeah, I think that's important. I mean, for anybody who builds something, whether it's a ministry specifically or just a company in general, I think being able to have that moment of stepping aside and kind of taking a breath and recognizing that it was only made possible through God. Like he gave you gifts, he gave you skills and interests and the assets and everything to do so. But it all comes from him, right? Like the tools that we were given that were placed upon our bench were from him. And we can take pride in that and that opportunity to be willing to pick up the tools. I think it can be discouraging at times because there's a lot of people who, especially in the world of Catholics who want to be entrepreneurs, not just building something externally Catholic, but just a business in general. It's very common for people to be like, oh no, you're just saying that your faith is important to kind of justify your love of money or something. Like you're justifying like your pursuit of success. But in reality, like it's never going to be perfect, but we have to at least be willing to talk about it and to pursue that, because through entrepreneurship, we can affect the lives of many, our employees and those around us. And obviously if we are financially successful, we can help other people as well too. So
sure. I remember when I was maybe 25 or 6 years old, maybe a little bit younger, here in Philadelphia, right after going through my kind of waking up to the faith. So it was actually a little bit younger, maybe 22, 23. I met a prominent mother in a family here in Philadelphia that really did great things. And she said to her son and to me, when we were very young, this is before doing ministry at all, I was doing secular work. She said, money in the right hands is a very good thing. And so there is absolutely always that tension in working for the church when money is involved. But Silas, after I asked myself basically 2 or 3 questions, a number of times over the years, I locked in that I was going to forget about that issue. I put it to rest. And actually, maybe other people have found it helpful when I've shared the 2 questions that I asked myself in this question of commerce and faith, that after I asked myself them a number of times over the years, I just locked in the question and put it aside. And those 2 questions were, so Ascension was sizable. If we were 100 times bigger than we were, and we were sizable, and therefore just remuneration would fall to everyone, including me, would we be different? And I think I answered the question, no, I'm about 98% certain that I would still really only want tube socks at Christmas and to go to breakfast a couple of times a week to clear my head and set my agenda. That's about it. The second question I then asked is, given those resources, am I about 100% certain, or close to it, that those are going to be used to take care of the temporal need of the family, no doubt, but are they going to be used for the kingdom? So in answering those 2 questions, and I say the same thing to anyone who's listening, who's doing ministry and commerce, do you believe that you would be fundamentally different if your life had 100 times more economic value than it currently does? A. B. Are you about 100% or 98% certain that after your temporal needs and good, comfortable living with your family, are you pretty sure you're going to be using resources for kingdom building? And if you can land safely on both of those questions, one should put the really financial question out of your head. You should address it periodically. One other thing, Silas, we did as a family and as a company, and this is not a boast, this is a marker for those who are listening, is feel the pain financially by tithing. I mean, make it a little bit painful. And we did as a company. We'd look at the end year results, and then we would set that benchmark for tithing in the upcoming year. And then we tried to do it as a family, maybe even did it more accurately as a family then. But what they do is they build safeguards when you don't fully trust yourself. And at the end of the day, no human being should fully trust him or herself.
Hey folks, as a quick reminder, we have recently launched The Faithful Steward. This is a free private deal flow newsletter for Catholic investors to be made aware of opportunities to invest in other Catholic-owned or led companies or projects. These deal types will range from startup investment opportunities to film opportunities to real estate, anything you can think of, it will be in there. And it's totally free. We are not charging for this. We are just trying to help connect the community. To sign up, you can go to CatholicDealFlow.com. That's CatholicDealFlow.com. How it works is when we get a deal, we make sure that these guys are Catholic. We will then package it up really nicely, send it over to you, and then you can take a look and decide if you would like to reach out. The benefit of this is that you get to remain completely anonymous from all those capital seekers while still getting the benefit of seeing those deals. So you get the benefit of seeing the deals without the publicity of being known. We are not gatekeeping here, so just trying to use our role as a community connector to help Catholics invest in each other and doing this all again for free. If you are a Catholic builder who is looking to raise capital, whether that again is for a film, for real estate, for a startup, or just a mom and pop brick and mortar business, you can go to CatholicDealFlow.com to sign up. You just submit your deck there and a bit of information about you. We'll reach out, we'll verify that you are in fact a practicing Catholic, then we'll package it all up and send it out to the newsletter, and if they're interested, they'll reach out to you. Again, that is CatholicDealFlow.com. It's completely free. You can sign up today. All right, back to the show. No, that's fair. I like that a lot. That's some really good practical advice there. I am curious. I don't want to unpack the entire story of building Ascension, but I am curious. Like, what was the key point in building it? Because if I were to assume, like, the beginning days were probably challenging. Like, it's probably like scratching and clawing to just grow it. But like, when did a really big inflection point happen? When did it start to feel like, man, this is really moving and it's being kind of pulled out of us?
Yeah. So in the beginning days, just like when you're a young husband and wife with a new baby and all the challenges that come with that, Well, you do it because you're young and you're new to it and you're fascinated with the baby. That's the way we were with Ascension in the beginning years. We knew that there was newish territory being trekked on, and I can describe what that new territory is if need be. And so in those beginning years, we were just excited to be parents, metaphorically. We had this baby that was getting built in those first few years. You're just going on fascination and amazement and fun. And you saw that the bills were getting paid, so it was working. But the inflection points, there were about a half dozen over those 23 years. But the first of them was early, about 4 or 5 years in, when we realized that there was a big hole in the Catholic world, not in the evangelical world, for learning systems, small groups. We were a book publisher initially, but very early in the game, we pivoted to learning systems. And during my time, we ended up having 55 or 56 learning systems. And a learning system is, again, small groups. We did marriage preparation for about 20 dioceses. That was a big inflection point. Another inflection point is we became the publisher of The Great Adventure Bible Timeline and then Theology of the Body, Christopher West. Another big inflection point, and it really potentially was the coolest story in Ascension's history, is, and again, I don't say this, I say this just to describe it. None of this is meant as boast. Hopefully that's very clear to everyone. Was the conception and the very fast execution of the Mel Gibson book that we did as a companion to the movie. And it's really an amazing story. In short, we wrote a book in about 4 or 5 weeks. We released it. Evangelicals were going gangbusters with the Passion movie. In the Catholic world, almost nothing was being done. And within the first week, Silas, we sold more than 100,000 books. And just by way of comparison, a Catholic bestseller at the time was about 10,000. Now it's probably about 7,000. A secular bestseller was about 30,000. And we sold 100,000 books in a week because of all the pent up. We then proceeded to sell, and again, not boasting, just describing, we ended up selling about 1 million books in about 14 weeks. We translated within that 14 weeks the book into 6 languages. So that was an unbelievable experience. Clearly grace was involved. It became well beyond us. From there, there were a number of things, but fast forward about 10 years later, the launch of Ascension Presents. That became the social media platform. The original plan there was for a platform for young adults, but we quickly came to see that Father Mike was loved by everyone. So that around 2015, but there were a whole host of things. There really were like 6, 7 big things over those 23 years. And then Ascension Presents became, well, it didn't become it. We created the Great Adventure Bible, and then that became the Bible in the year. But there was a lot more, but that's the highlights.
Just to clarify, was that, you said there was 1 million books? That was the single book, or those were all your books that you guys were selling over that?
A single book. We did,
Wow.
we did about 600,000 units in 14 weeks. And then we did about 400,000 in licenses to other countries.
Okay.
And just anyone who's in publishing, or maybe any business would understand this, but especially in publishing. So we had about a half dozen other books, maybe more that season, that spring season. Nothing else got attention. We then just re-released all of those 6 books, the following season, because none of them got any attention. And
Yeah, exactly. There's so many people don't have they don't have a large reading budget, I guess, in terms of their focus.
well, I mean, we just didn't have the ability to give attention to anything else. And one other anecdote that you might find interesting is we were sitting in this small office, I don't know, maybe 800 square feet of office in Westchester, Pennsylvania, doing this initiative. And there was a little bit of a scary moment, a little bit of a wake-up call for the church that you and I love, is it dawned on me that the worldwide standard for Catholic Passion initiatives was being carried out by a staff of like 7 or 8 people in 800 square feet of office in Westchester, PA. That's a broken system if we were the worldwide standard. And so I say this to anyone who's listening. If you think of an idea and it looks like it works out from the different angles that you look at it, be bold and go for these things. You got to exhibit prudence first, but be bold. Because the fact that we pulled this off, will show you what God will give you back. If you give him this, I believe God will then give you this back. And for those who are just listening, I held my fingers at 1 inch apart and then my hands, 2 feet apart. So be bold, be prudent, do all your numbers, do all your discernments, but be bold. We need more bold Catholics. And in the recent years, we're seeing a lot of bold Catholics, including what you're doing here.
Appreciate that. How did you discover Father Mike Schmitz?
One of my staff had heard him speak, I think the story is. And there was a lesson in here too as well that I think it's important for people to hear. So one of my staff, we had already determined that we were going to do this platform for young adults. And then one of my staff, I think maybe heard him speak at Steubenville and said, this guy's really good. And we then built like 1 or 2 other personalities right away. So it wasn't just Father Mike. But here's the lesson that I learned from this. And I didn't know this lesson prior to this experience, but it dawned on me that it took a certain mentality. It was a 22 or 23-year-old staff member who was just engaged in a different world and saw the world differently that saw him. I believe it was Maria Mitchell on my staff. She's very talented. And so she brought him to us. But here's the lesson one of the many lessons that came from that is a few years later, I remember saying to my senior staff, we need a constant stream of 22 and 23-year-olds coming through these doors because they do see the world differently and they do have experiences and they do have skill sets. And so, we had a very young staff in the years that followed. I think our average age, I would have been, let's say, at the time, 53 or so, or no, maybe 50 or so. But our average, and I was one of the 2 or 3 older people. So our average age was probably 35 years old, 32 years old, something like that.
Yeah, it's a very fascinating challenge to consider because I think it's something that people forget that when they're young, they automatically look at the people above them who are older than them and realize like, hey, they just don't understand. They don't see things the way I do. But then we get older and we forget the same thing is happening with the younger people below us, right? Like I notice this with my youngest siblings. I'm like, and their peers, I'm like, what is going on with these kids? Like, I don't understand. I know that's not wrong. It's just like, I don't understand the way they view the world. Right? And this is interesting, whether you're running a ministry or just a business, to intentionally have that kind of diversity of ages, because especially if you're trying to reach a younger generation or be prepared for the next wave of innovation, you need to be able to speak their language, right? And that's, I don't know like all of the nuances of Ascension Presents and Ascension in general. Like I recognize that those things resonated with me probably because, the people that were on your team were in a similar age group. They thought this was interesting and therefore it resonated with us, right? So once you guys launched Ascension Presents, what were the core things that happened there? Did people just immediately latch on to Father Mike Schmitz? Did all the other personalities just really start to grow? Like I don't know the landscape of social media at the time when you guys came in. Were there a lot of other Catholics doing stuff in that space, or was it kind of just an open field?
Yeah, but no, we were a pretty early mover. We would have been probably in the first 10 to 15%. But what it took, I mean, remember now, we had existed for 17 years prior to this. Mm-hmm. And we were sizable for 10 years prior to this, beginning, around 2005, 6, 7 or so. What am I saying here? So we had a big platform already. And in fact, here's a quick anecdote that you might benefit you in your own venture, but anyone who's listening who has a venture. Someone once came to me one time. Let's call him Steve. That's not his real name. And this person had a book, and this person said, Matt, can you do an email blast for this book? And I said to Steve, sure. We didn't publish it. I was doing it because this person was a friend. This person, Steve, I said, oh, by the way, books are not ultimately sold, though, through email blasts. They're sold by infrastructure. And the 10 years of prior infrastructure that was slowly and painfully built over those years. So by the time Ascension Presents had come about, it was a good idea. And of course, Father Mike was a great idea. But there really was 15 years of infrastructure underneath it. So I say to anyone who's listening, think big, but realize that you gotta lock in and you gotta put in the time. Very few things are cultural phenomena. Even the viral things that we see pop up. Well, for every one viral phenomena, how many videos are produced that are not viral? Yeah. 500,000?
So, a lot.
Yeah. So a takeaway for anyone who's listening is have optimism, have zeal, pray for zeal. But I'm sorry, guys, most instances, you got to get ready to lock in because there really are very few free lunches. It's just going to take time. It's going to take applied pressure, to a good idea.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I think you mentioned this really quickly in passing. You said it was early on, and you said 4 to 5 years. I think a lot of entrepreneurs would not think that 4 to 5 years is early on, but in reality, that is, right? Because we're doing this for the long haul. We shouldn't be in this for some kind of, short, quick win. I think that being in entrepreneurship just to like make a pile of money really quickly and then do, have fun with it is the wrong reason, first of all, to be in entrepreneurship, because we're here to be co-creators with God. Like he's given us these skills to use for his benefit and his glory. Whether that's you're a dentist and you're serving, people who need dentistry and who can't afford it through your skills, or it's something else, right? So I just wanted to highlight that and before we move on. Now, I think this is a good place to pivot. You were just kind of giving me a little bit of advice on this infrastructure component of putting in the effort to do things properly leading up to it, and then you might have that kind of lightning in a bottle type of moment. I would like some advice from somebody who has built a media empire, so to speak. What are the core things that you would suggest that I am aware of or that I should do with Catholic founders to grow this and to do God's will with this?
Okay, so the first thing I would say is be realistic about the idea. For example, be realistic about the total accessible market, the TAM of your idea. Like, for example, Silas, if you're doing a Catholic Founders podcast, quite frankly, you don't need 80,000 people. You need 250 to 2,500 of the right people, because there's just not, founders are the exception, not the rule. So look at the realistic scope of what the idea warrants. And then, set your expectations and your budget and your business model to that. So is one's product a niche product or a mass market product? In fact, one thing I would say to people, and we discovered this at Ascension early in the game, probably around 2003, 4, 5, that we didn't need mass market ideas. Niche ideas where you sold a sizable percentage of that group was often better, because niche ideas totally narrowed your marketing focus and funnel. You could reach much of that entire niche maybe for $5 or $10 or $15,000, whereas a mass market work, you might need $25,000 to $100,000 or more to market that product. So what I would say to you or anyone who is doing a more niche thing is to understand what it is and what it is not. And there's no shame in anything. There's no real right answer. One can, you and I can just look online and look at the people who have built very, very big empires doing very niche things. So the first thing I would say is to realistically assess the total market that one could do. Then ask yourself a second question. Is this being done as a loss leader of some sort, or is it actually being done for a business model? So I'll just use you as an example here. Is the podcast being done as a loss leader to consulting services or something else? Or is it actually the model? In other words, and I'm not wanting to answer or trying to answer for you, but saying, oh no, Matt, this is my business. So then you just have to run the economic models to see if that dog will hunt. Very often things are good ideas, but they're destined to be lost leaders, and that's okay. They serve their role. Third thing is you really have to look at the true costs of things, not just the hard costs, but the hidden cost. And the quick example there for anyone who's listening is that the average person has somewhere around 2,200 hours a year to do things, a normal 45-hour work week job. You have to keep track of your time and really see how you're using your time to understand the true cost. So those are three bare minimum things that one needs to do. Look at the total market, look at whether this is a loss leader or an actual business, and then properly assess your time and compartmentalize that into the totality of your picture. If this is only a loss leader, then it really probably is only worth 10 to 20% of your time at most.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I think for any business owner, that advice is generally like very, very applicable, I think, to a lot of things. I am curious, are there any particular things that you would suggest that I avoid focusing on, or just like things that young people might get kind of distracted by as they're building, especially if it's in media? If busyness and admin work are keeping you from growing your business, it's time to call Paraclete VA. We connect Catholic business owners with elite Catholic virtual assistants worldwide to handle your marketing, finance, and busy work. How it works is you pay $500 on the day they start, and if you're still happy, after 30 days, you pay another $500. Most roles take less than 10 days to fill. To get started, just email admin@catholicfounders.com with a little bit about what you're looking for so you can get back to doing what matters.
Yeah, sure. I mean, ego is dust. Most things in life are dust, but ego especially. Now, if it's part of your gimmick and part of your thing, if you're especially in your secular world, because it's always very, very dangerous in the Catholic world, it's very dangerous in the secular world, then okay, maybe a little bit of the bravado is needed. But guys, just be brutally honest with everything. One way, and believe me, I've made this mistake many, many, many times, but I've gotten it right sometimes. And that is just be brutally honest with yourself. Really try not to care about making mistakes. Try not to care about ego and how you look. The faster you get to the point where you're just eager for the answer. And in fact, I remember probably hundreds of times in Ascension brainstorming meetings, we would begin it with something like the following statement. And the statement was, yo guys, in this room right now, you're all smart. Everyone's smart here. You wouldn't be here if you weren't smart. Now that that's established, put forth any ideas. Don't be embarrassed if it's a wrong idea. Don't be embarrassed if you shoot it down. Because everyone, we just need to get to point B as quickly as possible. So the takeaway for you or for anyone listening is if you can be kind of masochistic in the direction of you really don't care about the dust, the superficial stuff. We just need to get to point B as quickly as possible. It's really going to serve you very well, I think, in any aspect of life, especially carrying out business.
I think that's really helpful. I appreciate that a lot. I'm curious, how has your faith changed, or how has your relationship with God changed through being an entrepreneur? Have you particular things that you would reference about how it brought you closer to him through being an entrepreneur specifically, things that you probably would not have been experienced outside of entrepreneurship or business ownership?
Yeah, so I've addressed this question many, many times, and with people mostly who work in the secular world. And I've said to them, the sheer fact that the work that we were able to do, the content, the stuff, quote, that we were selling and promoting was Catholic content was really like a major advantage to being able to live the faith, because you're surrounded all the time by good content. And so it's a totally unfair advantage for someone working in this world than maybe someone in the secular world. So in that sense, Silas, there's no doubt that unless you were resistant to these graces and this formation, it was probably going to make you a better person. Another thing, out of the 150 staff, let's say that were part of Ascension over my years, I don't know that there was one person in the mix who was bad, who was a bad apple. So the fact that we were surrounded all the time by people who were trying to really live the faith, that's a massive difference maker. So those are two in the positive direction. In the negative direction, though, in my case in particular, the unsettledness of not fully feeling comfortable standing on sand spawned surely at times, me maybe not seeing some of my staff, or maybe seeing my wife properly. So in that sense, but that was probably more, kind of personality driven, that when you're building something, you're paranoid in a sense. There's a famous book written by someone who ran a multi-billion with a B company, Intel, the chips. His name was Andy Grove. And Andy Grove wrote this book at the time he was running a multi-billion-dollar company, and the title of the book was Only the Paranoid Survive. And so I don't say paranoid in any neurosis sense. I just say, and everyone who's running an entity right now, whether a secular business or a ministry, should be able to relate to this, that you're nervous. You're nervous about how it's going to work. You're nervous about how you're going to have a staff of 60 people on a multi-million-dollar payroll. How you're going to do that each month. So I don't use the word paranoid in any neurotic way, but as a descriptor that type of existence for 20 years or 15 years or 10 years can fight against your relationship with God. Not that you didn't intellectually believe, but you may not be the best husband when you come home. And so that's all I'm saying there. Or you may not be the best boss. You want it to be, but it was not easy at times feeling that. Hopefully somewhere there's an answer in there.
Yeah. I mean, it's just interesting to consider that if we can learn to embrace or face the challenges and recognize what they are, then they can be kind of reminders that bring us back to reality, that we're not perfect, that we're not, invincible, and that we can use those moments to recognize where it is that we need to ask for grace and ask for special blessings, right, to handle those. And it takes we can only recognize that through God's grace in the first place. But I have found, talking to people, that usually they say if they have a regular schedule of reflection, either daily or weekly, they'll start to recognize those things, because it's kind of hard not to if you give yourself some silence and you're genuinely asking the question, like, where can I improve?
Hear, hear. And frankly, if I had to narrow the 23-year experience down to one shortcoming, one thing that should have been done better, it was clearly that time of reflection. You wake up in the morning, we also had a family, sizable family, but you were off and running. And clearly, you did the basics, the sacramental life and staying in a state of grace. We also built in some safeguards at Ascension that were pretty good. We did annual consecrations. We allowed people to do adoration during work, and we did daily rosary and prayer. That being said, Silas, without question, if I had just one message that you're triggering here that I had to share with anyone who's listening, that would be, I should have been doing probably triple the personal prayer time. And that's not, I don't say that to be cute.
Yeah. Now, I think it's always it's one of those things where we tend to make excuses about a lot of things. You see this with people who are really like hesitant to start a business because they talk about it, but they don't really do anything because they have an excuse for everything, right? And I think the same thing is true of entrepreneurs once we get into it, like with our spiritual life. We have an excuse for everything. Oh, I can't do this. I'm too busy. The business needs me, blah, 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 blah. But the reality is that God, if we make the time for God, he will help us out, right? And I don't mean this in some sort of like, prosperity gospel type of thing. I just mean this like God, we have to give him our first fruits, right? So I think that if we do that, it's just really an act of trust in him. So, obviously, go ahead.
If you don't mind. And again, a lot of this could be, I'm 60 years old and you're looking back and you tend to see the mistakes you made. You feel them more than maybe the good things. So an element of this could be you're lashing yourself a little bit too hard but that the principle is one that you just can't go wrong with. All who are listening, really, if you put in that time, if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to make a secular corollary to that's pure business. So you just echoed a statement, and maybe I echoed it back to you, that take care of first things first with the prayer time. But here's a pragmatic, just business tool as well. And you've heard this before, but it's always good to hear it again. And that is, there was too much time, I think, spent in the business versus on the business, meaning just think time. There was a time in the Ascension 23 years, I remember, where we tried to allocate senior leadership, middle leadership, earmarking a certain amount of time, 20, 30% just for thinking. And we do it for a while and then we forget. So both of those are similar corollaries. One in the spiritual realm that you alluded to, and then one just in a natural realm. Taking time to just reflect on your business versus just putting out fires all the time and working in the business. Working on the business versus working in, and analogously, working on yourself versus just getting up and going.
Yeah, no, that's a really good reminder. I think that's a really good call out. We obviously, with Catholic Founders, I'm talking to a lot of people. Sometimes when I mention the project of Catholic Founders, they assume I'm talking about externally Catholic businesses that are selling rosaries or doing something specifically Catholic. Obviously, I don't necessarily mean that. I mean Catholics being entrepreneurs. But I'm curious your perspective on this whole ecosystem. Do you think that we need more Catholics being business owners, or do we need more Catholic businesses?
Well, I think we need both. One thing I did say at Ascension, again, these are only said as anecdotes, is despite the fact that we were competing in the broad sense of the word against other good groups out there, whether it's Augustine Institute or Word on Fire, Matthew Kelly, or the other good publishers, we also knew that the world needed a lot more of us. Even though in those first few years, all of us in the first, the last 20, 25 years, we're all fighting for that 3, 4, 5, 6, 7% of Catholics who are kind of intellectually engaging their faith in some manner. That being said, we absolutely need more of most every business in the Catholic ecosystem. But to the broader point of your question, and this is one thing that you're doing, that John Cannon and the good people over at Cent are doing, Catholic-owned, a new apostolate. Her name is slipping me, but she's a sharp girl.
Brooke Joyner.
Brooke Joyner is doing. Ryan Foley is doing something, in this regard down in Atlanta. We need more Catholic owned secular businesses as well that are imbibed. You know this as well or better than I with Catholic values. The evangelicals are big on this. They have an ecosystem that's probably 6 to 8 times more attentive to this question that you're being attentive to here. And so we need more Catholic-owned secular businesses, but we do need more Catholic-owned ecosystem businesses within the Catholic ecosystem as well.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think it's all of the above. The reason I bring it up is because a lot of people, they want to do this Benedictine option of like only selling to Catholics and just building something completely disconnected from the world. And I don't necessarily, I see the value in that. I just really also know that there's a need to influence the world through the truth, right? We have the truth. It's on our side. We have an advantage that nobody else has, is we have the we know what's real and true, and we have the Eucharist. So like we should be basically supercharged.
Yes, this is a theme also that I thought about and I really think, Silas, this might be the Catholic genius most of all. Now, I understand the Eucharist, and you can't get any bigger than God himself becoming flesh through the bread and wine, no doubt about it. But I'm talking about a different level of discussion, but not a different level, but a different level of discussion. And that is when God became man, the incarnation, there really was an affirmation of the created world. And one thing I think that we Catholics do is I think we understand the symbiotic nature of body and spirit because I think we take the incarnation seriously. When God became man, it was an affirmation of the created world. Now, good Catholic theology tells us that it's bent, like C.S. Lewis says, like my finger is kind of bent here. It's bent, but the world, unlike certain forms of traditional Protestantism, matter is not totally corrupt. No, it's bent, but with God's grace, we can sanctify ourselves and the temporal order. So all this kind of fancy words, what do they mean? I think we Catholics actually understand the balance of body and spirit better than the rest of the world, better than other theologies. And so therefore, we should be able to find that balance of how to do business better than anyone. It's not kind of pure Calvinism where John Calvin and what was kind of preached here in America, that you were righteous, you were successful due to your righteousness. That's an aberration. But nor is the other side of the equation that there is no spiritual life and it's every man can get what he can get. Catholicism really understands this intermingling of body and spirit. And therefore, I think we would end up having the best human resources policies, the best business practices in all its facets.
If you're a Catholic business owner, you should not be building alone. Join the Catholic Founders Guild at CatholicFounders.com/subscribe. For $10 a month, you can join a group of Catholic founders who are dedicated to bringing the culture back to God. Don't build alone. Join the Catholic Founders Guild today. Yeah, I can't agree more. I think that this is especially, there's a lot of concern and uncertainty with AI and the kind of way it will transform the workplace and potentially, lay off many people, will be out of a job. But I also think that it's in some ways an exciting time because people are going to really start to question their value and their worth. And most likely they're going to start looking up and looking around and saying, okay, well, who seems to have an answer here? And if we're truly living our faith as Catholics, we should be the most peaceful people, even in times of challenge, because we have God and we know that he's with us, whether that's in poverty or in wealth. And it should attract people in. I think this is the opportunity that we have now, is to really deepen our faith so that people, when they do come looking, they start to recognize there's something. What do they say exactly? That joy is the true mark of a Christian, right? Like they'll see that joy regardless of the circumstances that we're in. So I don't know if there's anything you want to add there.
Yeah. So let's just touch on AI, but you could really say it for any new technology, whether it was radio, the computers, the internet, Morse code, even, let's say, that in the beginning years, there's going to be turmoil. But Silas, I know this sounds triumphalistic, but it's true. Catholicism will figure out the answer. And that is not a boast. It is a fact of history. Now, others may figure it out quicker than us at given times, but if you had to bet on any horse out of all the horses in the world, the theological systems or groups, over the long haul and over a wide range of issues, Catholicism will figure it out. And the reason why it will figure it out, I believe, is this proper understanding of the mix between body and spirit. I just think we get the human person better. And none of this is meant as a boast for the church, but it is a fact, and we should say it. It is one of the great gifts of Catholicism, our understanding of humanism, Christian humanism, the human person. And so we'll figure out the proper balance of this AI reality at some point.
I fully agree. You now have kind of transitioned out of Ascension, and you're doing a bit of investing now. We don't have to talk about exactly what you're targeting unless you want to, but I'm just generally curious to hear your overall perspective on if a person has excess capital, more than they need to kind of take care of the needs of their family in a modest way. How should they perceive, in your perspective, that excess capital? Is it meant to be just multiplied and do whatever is the smartest investment to grow it so that it can be then donated? Do you believe in just allocating a certain percentage of the income towards tithing and then just let it grow and grow and grow? Do you believe that the Holy Spirit, you should just lead you and you just invest where you're called to invest regardless of what it sounds like? I would love your perspective on this.
Oh, well, discernment is I love the concept that the church gives us, that prudence is the mother of all virtues. Many of those things you rattled off, I started to say all of the above, except for perhaps that last one where it felt more like a loose just doing it. So I would say that our resources were meant to bear fruit. To be clear, anyone who's running a Catholic venture, whether it's a secular product or even in the Catholic world, we are allowed to bring stability to our family. It's not to be worshipped, but nor is it to, in a Jansenistic, Puritanistic, scrupulous way, need to be feared. So we're called as husbands and fathers to stabilize the family. We're called to obviously honor God first and foremost, no doubt, and be attentive to our spiritual lives. But our first vocation is to stabilize our families. So to answer your question, I would say that any excess resources beyond the normal, reasonable stabilizing of the family, you should have a quick eye, not a blind eye, but a quick eye to wanting to see how they can be fruitful. I think there's a certain thing that God builds into the system, this kind of tithing concept, which the church, strictly speaking, doesn't literally necessarily believe from what I've been taught. We're supposed to be a cheerful giver, and we're supposed to go beyond that 10% number if we're comfortably able to. So the short answer to your question is all resources are intended to be fruitful. Fruitful first in stabilizing your family, but if there is excess, clearly you should have a quick eye of, can I do something with that? You shouldn't willy-nilly do something with it, but the heart wants to do something with it. I read a book many years ago that I would recommend by a very successful Catholic. His name is Frank Hanna, Hanna, and his book was called What Your Money Means. And he really addresses the money question very, very well, and so I would recommend that to people. Father Mitch Pacwa also did a series on resources that I would recommend people listen to. So the short answer is, yeah, we should have an instinct that we want to bear fruit with them, prudent in our first vocation, which is managing, our family as fathers.
I guess if you want to touch on it, now you're doing a little bit of investing kind of occasionally. I'm kind of curious, what are the core types of ventures that you like to look at in case anybody is listening and should get in touch with you?
Yeah. So by way of disclaimer, I'm new to this idea, and I tell everyone that I'm working with in this regard that I'm learning this whole world of investing. I kind of earmarked a certain amount of investing in the first 2 years to really just want to help founders, and there was mild scrutiny. I wasn't even necessarily expecting returns, but I wanted to do it because I thought it was good for the church, and let me just amplify that for you. I noticed that there was about 35 groups in the evangelical world that were doors to knock on, set up as doors to knock on for venture capital and private equity. And I know of a number of good individual angel investors in the Catholic world, but at the time, maybe 4 years ago, I didn't know of any doors to knock on. So in truth, I moved down this path just to kind of do it because I thought it would be good for the church, because the evangelicals had like 35 groups doing it, as I shared. But since that time, after an initial half dozen investments, and we're up to now 10, we're doing them with more scrutiny because these are resources that we're supposed to steward. They would fall, I would say, Silas, more into the category of impact investing. And for those who may not know that phrase, you have high return investing where you're shooting for a 20% or 30% or a 10x or 5x, like you often see in Silicon Valley. But then you have this 3 to 5 to 7% impact investing where you're making investments because they're just good for humanity. So I think it started out in that direction, impact investing. But then I realized, well, no, because there's only so many resources. Well, no, future investments need to be scrutinized a little bit more. So the short answer is I was an operator for an Ascension Press operator. That sounds like a bad connotation. An operator just means you run a business. Now we're in the other side and we're trying to fund people and help them. But even that has taken an evolution from impact initially with the first dedicated resources to now more scrutiny. Not ever really looking in the Catholic world for a 10x or a 15x or a 20x. But I'll just close this point by saying if these more recent investments do yield a return, remember the early question early in the interview, am I about 98% certain that those resources are then going to, God willing, be recycled back into the ecosystem? Yeah, I am. So again, well, I shared
I like
that.
this a lot. I also think it's I just want to commend you and show appreciation for the fact that you are there's this meme going around a while ago, kind of like mid-COVID, about man in the arena, right? And how a lot of people they make some success, they have some success and they leave and they kind of just do their own thing. They live on a yacht and they just chill. And we don't have necessarily, I know there are probably several dozen people I could probably think of, but the Catholic arena needs more of these people who like you have been able to build something. Because of what you've built, you have the ability to get into many different doors that people like me may not be able to get into, and you can help the people that you invest in to open those doors, and we can help each other. It's not necessarily always about the money itself. It could just be about the coaching. It could just be about making a few introductions and helping each other out, all in good faith. Obviously, I think it's incumbent upon the builders as well to understand like how to make sure that your product is valuable, that you're being prudent about all of those things you mentioned before, what's your business model, etc. But I just really appreciate people like you being willing to stick at it, because there's only so much time that we have in this life to make the impact that God is asking us to make, and we can't really waste those moments, right? So I don't know if you had anything to that, but I just want to show my appreciation there.
Pray for me because we're still trying to figure these things out too, and what the proper balance is. But again, this next statement, I'm trying to figure it out. But so I have mentors. We all have mentors. So one particular guy is really very sharp. And so he and I are working even right now in this season of my life on what to do, how much to do, where to do it, and all that stuff. It's just good to have outside voices. And this person posited to me, well, what about the idea of you just not doing anything in the Catholic world? And I said, I can see that for a certain little season for healing at times, or maybe not a little season. So if someone needs to be attentive to something for some other good, noble cause, they can pursue that. But here's the punchline. I said to this guy, his name is John. I said, John, no. I believe, and I believe many of us should believe, that our salvation would actually be in jeopardy if we had gifts, natural gifts or resources, and they weren't brought to bear. There's a real spiritual danger zone there. Now, let me just give the caveat again. There may be certain seasons, maybe certain instances. Let's say, for example, one needs to reconnect with a spouse or your kids, or physically, one needs to get physically healthy again. One shouldn't take my statement about salvation too dangerously and not be attentive to those other first things that need to be attended to. But all things being equal, family relationships good, health being good, kind of a little bit woe to one if one is not looking to bear fruit. Also, one should be under spiritual direction to help with these issues, and also have mentors to help with these issues.
I can't agree more. So we'll we're over time here, but let's go through a couple rapid fire and then we'll end things here. So you've mentioned already a couple, but are there any particular scriptures that really inspire you from an entrepreneurial standpoint, either now or just kind of generally speaking throughout your journey?
Right. Yes, I had 3 on my wall at my office. So I looked at them for 10 years. And then one that is probably my favorite verse in scripture. I'll do that one first. That's 1 Corinthians 2:9. Eye has not seen, ear has not heard, it hasn't even entered into the human mind what God has prepared for those who love him. For some reason, 35 years ago, I was enamored with the idea of heaven, and that verse became a guiding star, hopefully more often than not. But the 3 business verses, I alluded to one of them earlier, the parable of the talents. Whenever I would get fearful about things, trying to balance commerce, money, and all this stuff, I would think of the parable of the talents. That was one. Another one, though, that was a counterbalance to the parable of the talents. The parable of the talents is kind of go for it with the Lord and with his grace. Counterbalance to that, because of the work I did selling products in the Catholic world was the verse in Scripture that speaks about you've made my Father's house a marketplace. That, let me just think. Maybe John's gospel, no, Matthew, late in Matthew's gospel, and then also in Luke's gospel. So this one also resonated in my head. And then lastly, what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and lose his soul in the process? So parable of the talents, what does it profit a man? You made my Father's house a den of thieves, but balanced with the parable of the talents. And I often concluded that fear could not drive the day. I had to move forward as long as we were guarding hearts and building in safeguards. We had to go for it. And then, of course, the eye is not seen verse.
Yeah. That's good. I like that a lot. I mean, I think it's just worth noting that I think it's good for us to have those kind of two things in tension, because it's not to say that we should go all in on one thing. There is this sense of going for it, but also being moderate in how we do things. So just kind of holding two things to be true at once. But who is an entrepreneur that really inspires you and why?
Well, there's a lot of them. Tom Monahan, pretty amazing what he did. I'm really impressed with what Mark Middendorf at Ave Maria is doing right now. There's a guy named Dave Duran's very sharp, attentive to his heart, Catholic businessman. On the secular level, I mean, how can't you marvel at what Steve Jobs did or Elon Musk? I marvel almost, daily or weekly at what Jeff Bezos has created. I do love machines. I do love systems. I think it's a virtue to figure those things out. Granted, you could worship them and they could be clearly a problem. But, I also view them as a real being good stewards, a lot of these guys, and exercising their brains and their resources. So those are some in the Catholic world: Duran, Mark Middendorf, Tom Monahan, Tim Gray at Bishop Barron. Tim Gray at Augustine Institute, very, very sharp guy. Bishop Barron, very, very sharp, in terms of how he built up something quite big.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I love those. Big fan of all of those people. So that's some of my favorites. And then, who is one of your favorite saints and why?
Yeah, well, I'll just mention two quickly. Thomas More, because he had achieved the highest level of, quote, secular success. He was the right hand to the king, and yet he was able to make the most unbelievable choice of the Lord over temporal life, and including his own death. I was blessed to be able to sit in his cell for about 20 minutes. It was pretty amazing. I would have loved to have stayed there for hours reflecting, truly. And then I'm also intrigued with St. Philip Neri. He's this saint with a joyous heart. Supposedly on his death, his heart actually expanded, and I think even supposedly, maybe somehow eked through or broke through his rib cage. So I was amazed that a saint could be so comfortable in the world and have recourse to humor that he became associated with. So I love that. But there's so many of them, but those are two.
Yeah. And what is your favorite devotion currently?
Well, I mean, I like one difference between now, my post busy life, and the busy life of 35 years prior to it is I can go to Mass more undistracted. I find myself, I'm able to be at Mass and not have 10 things, I'm bouncing in my head and trying to fend off. But I also do a lot of novenas. I like novenas, maybe because they're so measurable. 9-day, 54-day, and I'm doing a 9-month one right now, and it's going to be tough, but it's going well so far. Tough in the sense of staying with it, but
yeah, of course.
I also like so I like novenas.
Yeah, that's good. I tend to like them, but I always forget one day. I'm like, oh my goodness, like what kind of person am I? But anyways, that's really good. No, this has been amazing. I knew this was going to be a great conversation. I just want to say, again, really appreciate you coming on. Where should people reach out to you and for what? Because I know that, you don't necessarily need to talk to everybody, but what if somebody really needs help with something, what would that thing be and where should they reach out to you?
Right. So the initial investments that I did are going to be paused for a number of months, maybe 6 to 9 months, while I kind of digest mentally and recalibrate resources. The Genesis group, which is catholicfund.com, I can be reached there. There's a place to reach me. And then also I'm doing consulting at catholiccatalyst.com. And, we're not necessarily looking for work, but we're open to having conversations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate that. Again, pleasure having you on. I would love to, in the future, hear more of your stories, because I know that we have only scratched the surface, but this is a pleasure. I appreciate your time.
Silas, great. All the best.
Thank you so much for tuning in today, everybody. As you go back to your daily lives, I invite you to consider just the following 2 things as takeaways from this episode. There are many other potential takeaways, but these are the 2 that I just really invite you to kind of contemplate a little bit. First of all, are you using your talents to the best of your abilities? And do you realize that those talents are given to you by God to do good, to do His will in the world? I fully agree with Matt on this one, that woe to those who do not use their skills and do not use the talents that God gave them. And number 2, regardless if you have achieved a lot of financial success now or not, imagine yourself having achieved 100x as much success and growth. Can you say with total certainty that you will use that extra income that comes along with it to build the kingdom? Visualizing this is very critical to do now before you have that type of outcome, because not only will it help you make more money through that process of having a clear goal and vision about where you're going, but it will also ensure that you do not lose your soul in the process. It will also deepen your current commitment to giving with what you currently have. So those are the 2 things as a recap. Number 1, are you putting your talents to the use? Are you using your talents to the best of your abilities? And number 2, are you committed to using any excess capital or excess assets that you have, whether those are financial or otherwise, to advance the kingdom of God? If you're doing it now, are you going to do it in the future if you achieve great outcomes? All right, with that, I hope you enjoyed this discussion as much as I did. If these topics that we discuss resonate with you, if this idea of trying to pursue what does it mean to be a truly Catholic business owner, how do I put God at the center of my work to become a saint through doing this, then I really encourage you to consider joining our Catholic Founders Guild. We've got around 100 members in there currently. It consists primarily of a large community with different sub-channels to talk about technology, asks and offers, just learning from each other. We've got a membership directory so you can find people to do business with, find other people in your city, find people to learn from, etc. We do a number of monthly community calls, and all of this is only $100 a year or $10 a month. So we've made it so anybody can afford to join, whether you are in the process of discerning, what exactly your business is going to be, you're at the very early stages at the very beginning, or whether you have a business that's already established and growing and you have a little bit of advice to offer. Trying to build this place as a place where the truly beginners can match with those people who are a little bit more advanced, and we can help each other grow our businesses and learn from each other how to truly be Catholic entrepreneurs, how to truly put God at the center of our work. There's no gatekeeping here. So you can do that by going to CatholicFounders.com/subscribe. If you'd like to join, just pick any paid tier and we'll get you into the group there. Thank you so much for tuning in, and do not forget that you were created to create. God bless you, and see you next time on Catholic Founders.